to the Spring 2021 Friday Forum series, the Digital Misshaping and Shaping of the World. This is our third talk of our series, so we're really excited to continue and have Lauren here today, who's going to be presenting on her work and her experience. Oh, there's an echo. I apologize for that. Okay. So I'm just gonna quickly kind of set the scene and talk a little bit about Friday Forum and what it is for anyone who is new here and who maybe this is their first Friday Forum. Friday Forum is a weekly lecture series and it's held every semester here at the University Y. And the goal of Friday Forum is really to raise awareness about different national and international trends and events happening around the world and really help us provide a space to address topics of relevance and urgency in our society. Some of our past series, if you have been able to come to them or not, have been about topics like using art as activism, environmental justice, and just last semester, we took a look at the current state of our democracy. So really awesome series, awesome talks, and awesome themes all around. I'm going to quickly in the chat send in a list of all of our sponsors for this series. We're so thankful to be able to continue working with a lot of these partners and who have helped make this series possible. So thank you to everyone who has supported Friday Forum. And if you're interested in finding out how you could be a sponsor, definitely reach out to the university and we'd be happy to talk and get that sorted out. So like I mentioned, the point of Friday Forum and the series is really to just talk about different issues happening. And this semester, we're really interested in looking into technology and how technology is really shaping our world. We're all in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, and many of us are using technology more than ever before. And the world of technology really opens many doors for us, but it also comes with certain consequences that we have to consider. So with growing digital interaction, we really want to take a deeper look and get a better understanding at how technology intersects with things like race, class, privacy, education, faith, public health, and much, much more. How these interactions impact our everyday lives are really going to be important for us as we continue looking forward and thinking about how technology is really becoming a bigger part of our everyday lives. If you joined us last week, we had members of the Independent Media Center's Disinformation Defense Team, and they joined us and talked about their campaign to fight disinformation, which has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. Really engaging conversation. And today we're going to be continuing another look and having Lauren talk a little bit about her work and what she's done with different startups, nonprofits, academia, and exploring a few topics and stories and examples of what her projects have looked like and really help us think and answer the question, how can data and technology be used for good when the risks to do harm are so large? So while you're listening to the talk, if you have any questions, anything that Lauren is talking about that really catches your attention, please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature to send in any questions. And towards the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So definitely send those in as you're listening to the talk. So quickly to kind of introduce Lauren before passing it on to her. Lauren is currently the Senior Product Manager at Code for America, where she works to help folks get access to safety net benefits like SNAP and Medicaid through technology. She previously worked at Aridity, leading the smart city efforts in working with governments and telenetics data, the Center for Data Science and Public Policy at the University of Chicago as an Associate Director, and working with government and nonprofits on data science for social good projects across a variety of issues like criminal justice, public safety, environment, education, and much more. Prior to UChicago, Lauren was a product manager at Give Forward, IT manager at Ounce of Prevention Fund, and a technology consultant at Accenture's Technology Lab. Lauren graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a BS in general engineering, focusing on computer science and human-computer interaction, and active alternative spring break participant and board member here at the University Y. Lauren also currently is on the board of trustees here at the University Y and previously served on the board of directors for Breakaway, both organizations focused on developing student leadership. So we're really excited to have Lauren here and to be able to have her present and learn from her expertise. So Lauren, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you.
Thank you. That was great. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Excited to be here today. We'll probably be more on the shaping side of the digital shaping or misshaping. Let's see. Next slide. Okay, so this is me. You got my intro. I shared a picture on the right of still an echo. Let's see if we can do anything about that. Yeah, so as mentioned, I was very actively involved with the Y when I was a student. This is a campus coalitions of YMCA's conference that happened, and there was a bowling event that encouraged costumes, and we of course dressed as Dump and Run. So a little bit of throwback there. And yeah, most of this was included in the intro. What I wanted to spend today's time with was really talking through a couple of different case studies from the different areas that I've experienced, projects that I've worked on. So I won't go through this slide in detail because we've said it already. But just jumping right into some of the different interesting pieces of technology. So hopefully this isn't too self-serving as I think about the different projects that I've worked on, but there will be time for kind of questions at the end for sure. So the coolest thing that I worked on while I was at Accenture as a technology consultant was really working on this project called The Wall. And I got to work straight out of college at the High Museum of Atlanta while they had a piece of artwork several pieces of artwork from the Louvre. And as the third year of this collection, they wanted a big like throwback to some of the other work and to get people into the permanent collection of the High Museum instead of just what they had been seeing at the Louvre. And so Accenture had a pretty interesting technology that we just called The Wall, and you'll see why. You can see it in the photo there, that it was massive. It was basically a big touch screen. And when it was first developed, the way it works is not cameras. This was 2009. So like really before iPads were on the market for general use. Massive touch screen that would work by having cameras in the corners and trying to figure out as your finger was going to touch the wall, looking at that against the background. And basically it was looking for the contrast between your hand and a border that was happening below it. And I can safely say before, this was all kind of before I joined, but a lot of the development team was very clearly white because the way that the technology worked was figuring out the contrast between your skin, your hand, and a black border underneath it. And so before I joined, they had a number of folks come in that had some darker complexions, and the technology just didn't work for them at all. Like nothing happened as expected. They were going and like actually touching things, and the interactive piece wasn't responding, largely because the way it was working like depended on contrast that depended on like the color of your skin, quite literally. So diversity in the teams that design and build technology matters. Our experience that leads us to the work that we're doing and what we think about different situations changes the output of our technology and our design as we're building things, whether they are physical technologies like this wall or whether they are software that we're using, phone apps that we're using. Great. This is an eye chart. Apologies too for like the different feels between slides. I very clearly pulled things from past presentations, but shifting into some of the work that I had done with the University of Chicago and the Data Science for Social Good program, this is a number of the different organizations that we worked at where we said, hey, we have funding, we have a summer fellowship that we're training data scientists to come in and try to do work in the social sector. So we both recruited people to come do the work as well as organizations to actually pitch projects. So over the course of 3.5 years, I probably talked to 60, 100 different organizations somewhere in there to talk about what problems they had, what data they were collecting, places that they thought they might be able to use their resources a little bit more effectively and efficiently. So this is some of the problems that we were looking at and some of the projects that we did over the course of a few years. So can I detect who's going to get lead poisoning early so that we can prevent them from getting lead poisoning and do remediations in their homes? Can I determine which home inspections to prioritize? How do I improve the scheduling and assignment of my medics, ambulances, and fire trucks? Can I route citizen requests more effectively and efficiently? What policies do I modify to improve maternal mortality? How much impact is my after-school program having? can I get data that helps me match employers with employees? And this is where we had a pretty generalizable template that we'd be able to say, these are the kinds of problems that data science and machine learning can solve, and trying to figure out how we can take them into different organizations, different policy areas, and really carry that on. So I'm going to dig into a few examples here of different projects that we actually did in this context. But I want to start with data are people, right? Like, we care about data because we're representing either humans or human behavior, and trying to extrapolate how we, at least in the social sector, how we can help improve improve people's lives. This was always focused on how do we make sure we're not hurting people. So in a lot of cases, if there were some intervention, like, we were making sure that we were aiming towards, we have a limited number of positive interventions we can give people. How do we help the most vulnerable? Or how do we help the people who will react to this intervention the most? None of the work that we were doing was punitive, and we made really, really sure as we were scoping that, like, the outcomes of these projects couldn't be punitive. So again, data are people. Like, I have always said, I like computers a whole lot, but people a whole lot more. And that's why I do this work, and very humbled and honored to be able to build technology and to do some of this work in a space where it does have the ability to help people. So this was a project that we did with the city of Syracuse, New York. There are about 240,000 main breaks a year as we're looking at water mains. It's very expensive to repair. You have to tear up the street in order to do it. And it's hard to know exactly what's going to break. The city of Syracuse, a lot of their pipes, like, they know where the pipe is and what it's made out of because it's written down in a journal somewhere. They don't necessarily have great data about what's happening. And there's about 180 breaks a year in Syracuse. So I know I just said data are people, and all of a sudden I'm talking about, like, water pipes, but it does have a human impact. There's disruption to life, there's loss of business, when they have to come dig up the street near you. It's annoying at best and incredibly disruptive at worst. So what we did was we came in, we took a bunch of data about the pipes, we took a bunch of data about where the historic breaks had been, and we were helping the city figure out how they might be able to go do tests and to do some checks to see which pipes were likely to break so that they could do the repair, which is less disruptive, before the break actually happens. So in normal cases, they would, like, randomly identify and just random check and be able to get about 5 pipes that eventually would break. We were able to identify with data and technology about 32 blocks that were identified by our model. So in this case, that means they can do proactive repairs rather than reactive repairs before, they can plan for it. So it's a couple of hours of a shutdown or a day of a shutdown for residents and businesses, rather than having to respond after something is broken and to do kind of emergency repairs. A lot of the partners that we worked with said something similar to this. So we're used to using data to justify funding decisions. Now we can use data to improve what we do. It actually would help their employees work more effectively, more efficiently. It would, again, help them direct limited resources to places that could have the most impact. I'll spend a little bit more time on this project because it's one that I spent a lot of time working on personally. And I think one of the cooler things that we did that really shows what is happening on the data side for a lot of governments and a lot of the social sector. So diving into the criminal justice system, there's about 11 million people who move through 3,100 jails. It's $22 billion in costs. And we know a lot of the population suffer from mental illness, have some sort of substance abuse disorder, and that in those cases, the criminal justice system ending up in jail is like I don't want to call it an intervention, but it is an outcome because there are other interventions that either haven't worked or people really just haven't gotten the help they needed earlier on. So we worked with Johnson County, Kansas to look at a few different systems. I'll dig into this a little bit more. So working with Johnson County, Kansas, we were able to get access to their emergency medical services data, so calls to 911, county mental health services data, as well as jail and criminal justice data. So you can see here by the different sizes of bubbles, how many different people. There's obviously a lot more people who call 911 just for any 911 need. That could be a medical emergency. It could be anything people call 911 for. County mental health services are this bubble. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the green bubble with the head in it. And then the criminal justice calls, which really are like police interactions, sheriff interactions, things that end people in jail. Again, not a great outcome. The county actually couldn't identify the intersection between those different services. Like, who are the people who are cycling through these different services? And how do we help the people who are most vulnerable because they have more interactions or are interacting with more services? The thought there being jail really is the worst place that they could end up, particularly if they're ending up in jail because of prior interactions in these different systems. So where we really wanted to focus was that intersection between the criminal justice system and the county mental health system. 911, there's plenty of reasons you'd call 911 that have kind of nothing to do with anything else other than like a health emergency or something. So we helped the county identify how many people were cycling through these systems, and even just knowing like, hey, we have thousands of people that we see multiple times a year, was something that was new to them that they couldn't necessarily do with their data. And they also definitely couldn't connect between the different systems, how many people had been seen by these different systems. So you would know in some cases that on the ground, what would actually happen is there would be like police officers who were responding to 911 calls who would end up talking to the ambulance drivers and realizing that they were seeing the same person over and over again, right? Like when you have some of those interactions, you do end up seeing the same people inside your own little bubble, but getting a sense of how many other services how many other interactions they were having with some form of government employee, government service. Again, not a positive outcome for folks. So what we were able to do beyond just like, here's the Venn diagram of how many people are interacting with these different services, we were able at the individual level, and all of this was anonymized in a way that we didn't have specific personally identifiable information, but we were able to link people across those different systems. Started to link that and then look at the individual data to see when did someone interact with the system, how long was that interaction, and how did that compare to the other interactions that they had. Like, is there a pattern to these sequences as we start looking at many people rather than just the individual data? So we pulled that historical data. We were able to build these sort of timelines and also compare that with demographic data to see if there were any other patterns that were happening, and then feed that into machine learning models, which would spit out something like a list with a risk score. All of the names here are team members or our county partners. So you'll see my name on there about the middle of the list. That's what you're looking at here. And so providing a ranked list of who is the most likely, based on the interactions that they've already had, to see them again coming up in the criminal justice system. Because our goal, again, is not to be like, let's put them in jail faster. It's to keep them out of jail, right? It's to give them services that could be effective and really help them out so that they don't end up in jail, because it's the worst outcome for the individual and it's probably the most expensive outcome for the county as well. So then results of that, of the top 200 individuals, we were able to split our data in a way that we can say, let's make predictions. If we were doing it now, let's take all the data prior to 2020. Let's make predictions for 2020 based on data before then and see how we actually did before we deploy it going into 2021, right? So we have a way of checking how good our models were performing based on essentially pretending that it was a year earlier. So we made that prediction for a year and said, of those top 200 predictions, 104 individuals went to jail in the next year. And of those individuals, if you counted up the time that they spent in jail, added up to about 19 years of total jail time across all of those individuals. So very expensive for the county, awful impacts for the individuals. And what we learned was that most of those individuals were people who had some sort of interaction with the county mental health system and had lapsed in that county mental health access. So they had at some point been getting some amount of mental health support, and that shifted into not receiving that support and ultimately ending up having some sort of interaction with the police that landed them in jail. So the solution here is if we can proactively identify those 200 individuals, we'd have someone like this caseworker here, this mental health professional, who can be a co-responder with the county and with the police to try to work on the mental health side of things and to get people connected to services as they're in crisis, or ideally proactively before they're in crisis, to be able to get them connected to mental health services instead of the criminal justice system, instead of ending up in jail. And so this now, we were doing this work in 2016. Now this is a great example of what we're talking about in terms of defunding the police, right? Like spend the money on using some knowledge of people to proactively reach out with mental health caseworkers or social workers instead of having police interactions that end up with terrible outcomes for individuals. So that's, we'll shift here a little bit from that work. There were a number of projects in the data science for social good side that, I probably saw 60 different projects over 3.5 years and a lot of conversations. So can definitely talk in more detail about other types of work that we did in that space. But we'll shift into work that I was doing with Arity. This is a couple of screenshots from a proposal we actually sent up to a traffic and technology federal competition that was happening around safety. Arity is a wholly owned subsidiary of Allstate, and if anybody has the any of the apps or like the dongle in your car that say, if you're a safe driver, we'll give you discounts for safe driving. That's basically the technology that Arity built and maintained. So we have a bunch of data in these cases that individual people have said, yes, please collect my data. I'm getting something good for me out of it. I'm getting a discount. I'm getting some sort of functionality. And we're able to take that not at the individual level, but in aggregate to say, okay, we're trying to make driving traffic, we're trying to make transportation safer, smarter, more useful for everyone. We have all of this data. There are probably cases where the unsafe driving behavior is not a reflection of the individual, but is actually something that's happening in the roadway. How can we take the data that we have and involve government to try to actually work smarter? If we know that I'm generally a very safe driver and I slam on my brakes in this one intersection, maybe it's not me, maybe it's like something that's happening in the roadway. And so we wanted to figure out how to tap government partners and did a lot of this work with the city of Chicago, actually, and getting into trying to identify high-risk corridors. So we were looking at the Vision Zero projects where they're trying to reduce the number of pedestrian fatalities to zero based on traffic incidences. And we were able to work with the city and start partnering to see like, hey, we have all of this data. These are the physical areas of the city where we start seeing higher incidents of risky behavior. Do those map up with the Vision Zero corridors? Do they map up with other areas where you have projects to help the city prioritize where to make investments in road safety changes that they might make? So this might be protected bike lanes. It might be changing the timing of the actual traffic lights to extend how long the yellow light is, or to change the pattern in some way through those intersections. And was pretty interesting. So what you see here on the left is a couple of just thoughts identifying those corridors that are highest risk. And on the right is showing a heat map of the different areas that we had seen risky behavior, whether it was speeding, slamming on your brakes, something like that. Crashes also factor into that. And it's pretty different than what you would see from what the city has, where what the city has is a lot of crash reports, right? Like they have instances where the police have shown up at some point after a crash has happened, and they're responding to whatever they can see as a result of that crash. They don't get all of the data that led up to, is it just that we were lucky and a crash hasn't happened here before, that there is something in the environment that is actively risky and there are a lot of near misses? We start to be able to see some of those near misses. And so pretty interesting to talk, like obviously cities have limited resources to go put in, unfortunately, things like bike lanes to try to do any sort of mitigation for traffic crashes that they're seeing, where it's not always just some individual was exhibiting risky behavior, but there are intersections where we see crashes happen time and time and time again. Being able to dig into some of that. So pretty cool visualization of data. I will say one of the things as we're looking at this was that the clients that had given their data were all opting in, right? They were getting some sort of value out of it. So we spent a lot of time thinking about like, what are the ethics as you're opting in? Like, what are other functionality we can give to, we already stopped the smart cities work and I stuck around for a while as they were thinking about like, how do we get more people on our mobile app? That's like, what are the trade-offs? Like, how do you make it useful for me to say, yes, you can collect all of this data about me when we are talking about my movement? Like, there are a ton of places where as I move around, you learn a lot about me based on where I go, right? And so what makes it worth it for me to opt in for that trade-off for some of the privacy considerations? So that was interesting because it was a lot of like, okay, people are opting in, but do they really know what they're getting into? And like, is it worth it for them? And trying to figure out things that were useful. Where this sort of evolved beyond the smart cities work was thinking about like, okay, if your weather app could actually track whether you're taking the bus or whether you're walking or whether you're driving, that might change when you need to leave if the weather is going to be bad, right? Like, I know I would appreciate not that I leave my house during pandemic times, but hey, weather's pretty bad. You need to leave 20 minutes earlier to avoid some traffic or to be able to drive a little bit slower or something like that. So what are those trade-offs at the individual level that are worth some of the privacy trade-offs? So it's pretty interesting looking at these pieces in aggregate. You can actually tell, like, you thinking a little bit more abstractly, you're like, oh, this is interesting. They go to church. Well, I've just learned someone's religion based on the fact that I know what church they go to, right? Or what other religious institution they go to. So thinking about how we can communicate those risks and those trade-offs and make sure it's actually worth it to the client and operate in a way that people are opting in and they know what they're opting into and the risks. Knowing that there are a lot of technology companies that like don't have people thinking about, okay, if we were to use this maliciously, what could we do? Or like, how do we actually protect people? And that's something that I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot of changes as it becomes like we have to hold the big technology companies like to treating data in a way that people know what they're getting into and that they're like actively consenting to it, rather than just saying, well, they checked that box of legalese that we know for a fact people didn't read. I think I just had the one slide from there. So I'm going to shift a little bit into time at Code for America. So I've been at Code for America since September of 2019. I work in the safety net. So that's SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps, Medicaid, TANF, which is cash welfare, some pieces around WIC, women, infants, and children, and a few other safety net programs. So really looking at like, how do we support vulnerable people, usually with some sort of cash or cash-like benefit. Particularly relevant. I feel really, really grateful to be at Code for America in this pandemic time, able to help a lot of people and people that like we're very much at a moment in time where the safety net's been broken for a long time, and more people need it today. Like I know so many of my peers have been looking for unemployment and were folks that were, driving for Uber or Lyft or working for Instacart, and just like questions of whether they qualify for unemployment. Restaurant workers, really some interesting times now where a lot more people are looking to the safety net in a way that it's just getting a lot more attention on something that was broken, and it's something that breaks worse as there's a larger scale of people trying to access it. So before the pandemic, joined Code for America, really thinking about human-centered safety net principles. So this is tied to like design thinking, user-centered design. We try at Code for America really not to say user as much as possible, because it's just like there are more humane, human ways of centering the person that you're talking about. So we usually say clients or applicants inside the safety net or a beneficiary. But we're trying to create a safety net that, compared to the one that we have today, has many welcoming doors. It's easy to understand. There are informed decisions that people know what they have to make. They can be responsive to changing needs. This is a big one in the pandemic, like social service offices. In a lot of cases, like if you couldn't get through the online tool, you had to go into an office and somebody would help you. Well, what happens when we can't physically go into the offices anymore? Like, aside from accessibility concerns for a percentage of the population, now there is no office to go into, right? All of these tools have to come online. What do we do there? And just really simple actions. So I'll dig into this work a little bit. Again, feel really humbled to have been able to work on this. As a result of the pandemic, nationally, there was a program called Pandemic EBT, or PEBT, that the Food and Nutrition Services launched. And this was really to get food benefits to kids that would have received free and reduced price lunch at school while schools were closed, right? So if you counted on getting breakfast and lunch at school and you're no longer physically going into a school, how do we get those benefits so that kids aren't going hungry? And we worked really closely, me and a team of about 10 people, with the state of California and the state of Minnesota, where we already had some existing relationships based on our other like regularly scheduled work, to build out this website. This is California's, but we're basically able to replicate our code and take it to Minnesota and serve children there as well, with a few different configurations. But basically, families that had met certain criteria actually had to apply online before the state would send them an EBT card. A lot of kids were getting about, depending on the state, over between $300 and $400, I think, per month, for each kid. So it's a substantial change and ability to put food on the table at the end of the day. And over the course of about 3 months, we delivered over $600 million in food benefits with a team of about 10, that we built this up very, very quickly. And so that was something that we already understood the needs of the people on the ground, because we've been doing extensive client research and extensive kind of like lots, and when I say client research, lots and lots and lots of talking to people about their needs, what life is like on a day-to-day basis for them, not specifically in the pandemic, but for folks that were relying on other EBT cards or thinking about applying for benefits. We had a pretty good understanding to be able to start working on some of these systems. So this was an incredible experience, because as a product manager, where it's like my job to make sure we're building the right thing at the right time and solving the right problem, and like what is the smallest thing we can build to solve the problem that we're trying to tackle, and really focused on let's talk about the problem and come up with 10 different solutions, and then figure out the right one that best addresses the problem with either the time or money that we have. It's not that often that you get to build a website or a product that has 100,000 people waiting to get in at midnight as you're launching a service. And that was what's happening here. And also just shows the need of the people, that people were waiting at midnight to get into our website. And so pretty interesting and heartbreaking and humbling to work on, and just like very gratifying in this pandemic to be able to like actually do something that's delivering benefits directly to people that need it. So that's Pandemic EBT. Again, tons of work. Our regularly scheduled work is with the state of Minnesota. We started this in about January of 2020 in terms of official partnership kickoff, and really started with ApplyMN, which is what Minnesotans can use to apply for SNAP and cash assistance, which is TANF and a few other things. There's emergency assistance programs, some housing support programs, and they use ApplyMN to try to apply for those programs. This is their existing website. As you can see, it does not really work well on mobile. There is a lot of text. It is next to impossible. If you were applying on a desktop or able to get through on your phone, it takes the average person about 55 minutes to apply online. And that doesn't include Medicaid. So really, we're trying to come in and get a mobile responsive website that people can apply for SNAP, cash, and Medicaid in under 20 minutes. And so we're taking it from this like really terrible, good luck getting it on your phone. And in this case, we do know, particularly from PEBT in Minnesota, about 85% of people were accessing PEBT website from mobile devices. So families are shifting so that almost everyone does have a smartphone. There are some people who are never going to have a smartphone for a number of reasons, but there are a lot of families that we're trying to serve that someone's cell phone is the device that they're using to access the internet at home. So not everyone has access to a desktop, whereas so many people do have access to cell phones. So we're trying to move from this terrible experience to one that delights residents and staff at mnbenefits.org. You can actually hit the website demo.mnbenefits.org and like see the full experience without actually submitting anything. But we ask people what they need help with. We launched this website in September, and we've accepted, I think now over 6,000 applications for residents in Minnesota to apply for benefits. And it takes about 12 minutes for them to apply for those SNAP and cash programs. So we're going for Medicaid next and integrating that in. But it does take that ApplyMN experience, which was about 55 minutes, down to about 12. And we spend a ton of time talking to clients that are applying for these services. We spend a ton of time talking to the caseworkers that process these to say, what are the criteria that actually matter for this program? Like, do we need to ask 10 questions or can we ask 5? Are there places that you know are confusing where people answered on the form, like if they were filling out a paper form, they actually didn't answer the question correctly because the way it's worded is hard. We try to ask everything at a 5th grade reading level. We try to ask people only one question at a time. So it shifts a lot of the questions from even the paper forms to yes or no questions, and try to ask people things that make sense to them. I know I have a hard time. I just got a form telling me I needed to renew my driver's license. And I was like, okay, pandemic brain and everything else, but I know I don't have the like mental capabilities right now to read this terrible legalese and figure out what I actually need to do and when. And I'm not in a situation where I'm experiencing extreme vulnerability and trying to figure out how to put food on the table at the end of the day. So we think a lot about cognitive load. We think a lot about reading level. So like I said, this is live. It's actually live in Spanish as well, which the existing application is not. And it really doesn't change any processes for the caseworkers who need to use it. We worked really closely with the state to figure out how to submit applications in a way that would come in ways that caseworkers needed like really minimal training to be able to pick up our application and run. We're in 4 counties right now in Minnesota and scaling from there. So that's pretty cool. Closing remarks then are we can use data and technology for good. We have to be thoughtful about it. We have to treat people like humans and figure out what their needs are and how to address those needs, and not just that technology is the silver bullet. We need diversity in the teams that are building technology. We need, like, whether that's racial diversity, but just diversity of experiences. Code for America has a community fellowship that's been really cool, where we asked for government organizations, cities that wanted to work with us on a specific number of areas, and then actually built technology teams to go work with them that all had lived experience in whatever issue they were trying to address. So we have some teams that are working on like clearing records for things like marijuana convictions that, in Illinois are no longer criminal. How do we clear those records previously? We now have a technology team, not in Illinois, but in a couple of other places, similar kind of project, doing record clearance with folks that had prior interactions with the criminal justice system. So they really understand the needs of the people on the ground because they have that experience themselves, that it's not me coming in and saying, hey, tell me everything about your life so that I can go build something that's hopefully going to help you. That doesn't feel great. So we need to actively involve the people affected by the issue they're addressing as we're designing these systems, and not just to interview them and use them as research subjects to tell them what's right for them, but as co-designers in these systems to empower people who are moving in those directions. So I'll close. These are a couple of pictures of me on ASB trips, building some things, which were nice breaks from being very like in screens, thinking about technology, writing code, even before pandemic, when I've been a person who stares at a lot of screens. Nice to have some manual labor outlets that also contribute to society positively. So I will pause there and see what questions we have. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was super interesting. For those of you watching or listening, if you guys have questions, please definitely make sure to send those in. Yeah, Jim said shout out to ASB and Lauren. Definitely. So I guess I could kind of kick it off a little bit. I know I have a few questions that I was just thinking about as you were talking. Again, please send those in if you guys have any questions listening as well. But as you were talking about the work you did with like criminal justice, I think that was a really interesting piece. And like you said, I think really does echo a lot of what we heard, especially in the most recent months, but that we've been hearing for a very long time. And something that kind of got me interested in what you were saying was I wanted to ask if, with the data you collected, if there was any information that you saw or any correlation you saw considering things like recidivism as well, and people going back to jail more than once, and what that kind of relationship might look like.
Yeah. It was interesting as I was at U Chicago because I was working on sort of two different initiatives, and one was the police data initiative where we're really looking inside police departments at like who was exhibiting bad behavior and how do we change something like that. Plenty of thoughts around like police reform and where police reform probably won't work. And then on the criminal justice, so it was the police data initiative and the data-driven justice initiative are really like, how do we get that? And obviously, like, best way to address recidivism is to like not even have folks go into the system in the first place, right? Like, how do we get folks attached to the services that are going to help them and are often cheaper, right? Like, super interesting working, particularly with government partners, where you have to not just be like, this is the right thing to do for people, but like to justify it with those financial means of like, hey, you're spending a ton of money on this and there's a cheaper way to do it. And it's obviously better for people. We did some work around recidivism, but in a lot of cases, it was like really looking at court data. And I think in that case, pretty interesting as you get into, I think some of the pushback to machine learning models is, well, you're going to introduce bias in it by having data. Like, you can't have race data because you're going to build a bias system. And it gets interesting because you're like, well, if we don't have race data, we also can't measure it to tell you that you're not racist in this algorithm that's coming out. Like, you need to at least give us the data so that we can measure it. If you're using zip code in a lot of cases, you've included race data. Like, that's actually highly predictive of people's race. And a lot of pushback too of like, where do you know that your judges who are making these decisions that determine how long people are going to interact with the criminal justice system? Like, do you know they're not biased? Have you done that measure? Do you know that the algorithm's actually worse versus better in those cases? I don't know that we did any particular projects around like can we, I mean, I would say the Johnson County work really was, can we keep people out of jail again, right? And so it was looking in those angles. I think that was an interesting just scoping problem where people are like, who's going to become homeless next month? And you're like, do you have data on the entire population of your city? And they're like, no, of course not. We don't just have a citizen roster. We're like, well, then we can't tell you who's going to come in for the first time ever, but we might be able to tell you who's going to return. And so that's the space where we did spend some time thinking about like, what are the services you can connect people to as they're leaving the criminal justice system to hopefully try to keep them out. But it was a little bit less of the angle that we started with.
Thank you. We have a question from Jamie saying, what kind of mental health services are provided? Are they government services? Do these people generally adhere to these services?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for Johnson County, in that case, they were county provided mental health services. So they were often, some of them were like inpatient, some of them were co-responders. So like, can we actually have someone go respond to a 911 call who is trained in de-escalation and trained in mental health like provisions? We were trying to do, so after I left U Chicago, there was work to say like, okay, let's actually take this list and go do the actual co-responding or and do some of that proactive outreach. In a lot of cases, the like intervention that we were suggesting was a phone call. Like, can we get someone who is a social worker to call people and see how they're doing and then refer them to other services? So it was less it's using the tools of the folks who are on the ground where it's their job to know what the appropriate tools are to use and not necessarily prescriptive to say like, oh, the data says you should get this prescription. It's definitely not that. It was much more like, hey, social worker, can you call this person and see if they're okay? And like, then let them do their job that they are experts in and go from there.
Awesome. Another question from Becca. Any tips, suggestions, or resources you'd suggest for organizations or agencies that don't necessarily have data expertise on staff, but who want to start using data to problem solve and evaluate programs? Great question.
I think there are a few different spaces. So NTEN.org is a nonprofit like technology organization, and they have a lot of folks that are in data and tech and thinking about what's possible there. Code for America has a lot of resources. We have local brigades in a lot of cases that are volunteers who are interested and willing to come like help think about scoping things out. There is a group called Data Analysts for Good or Data Analysts for Social Good that are like, in some cases putting on conferences that are like very much aimed at beginners and all the way up through experts and just interesting collections of people. Trying to think where else. Yeah, in a lot of cases, like even starting with, I think some of the local Code for America brigades is a good place to start because they'll potentially be able to connect you to folks that have resources or thoughts. And some of that's just like, where do you need training for your own team? I have a slide I didn't put in this presentation, but I was like, yeah, in the nonprofit and government world, right? You say data and people are like, oh my God. And you say science and people are like, ah, and then you say data science and they're like, no. So it's interesting just like digging into that space where particularly on like the business or the program side of the house, it can be scary to talk about data and technology and just like figuring out how to bridge the gap between people who speak technology fluently and people who have fear about it for good reason.
Thank you for those suggestions. I think another thing you talked about that was really interesting to me or that caught my attention was when you were talking about kind of opting in and the ethics of that, which I think, is something that maybe we don't think about or consider when we're opting into certain things. Like your example of the church and the religion was something that I would have never thought of if it wasn't, you sharing it. And so it also made me wonder, I think, when it comes to any type of data collection anyone does and it requires opting in, I think sometimes there's also, bias you have to consider. If somebody's opting in, does that affect your data in any way. Is that something that you know, in the work that you do, that you have to consider? How do you make those decisions of like choosing to opt in or not, or, you know, those ethics that you kind of talked about as well?
Yeah, I think maybe less on the like consumer opting in, but specifically with government services, right? Like we're trying our we also build Get Cal Fresh, which is a digital outreach to get people enrolled in SNAP in California. And so our North Star there is to try to close the eligibility gap, which means like if you take all of the people who are eligible for SNAP in California, like how do we make sure all of the people that are eligible are getting SNAP if they are eligible, right? And so we know the data kind of similar to the like homeless problem or like people experiencing homelessness that I was talking about earlier, like we know who's currently receiving it and we have numbers on who is like eligible, but actually figuring out who falls in that gap that they're eligible and not getting it is a challenge. And so that is something that we can look at the data around who is getting it and the like demographics for who is receiving it, and then data around who's eligible for it and go, oh, actually, like we're not reaching Spanish speakers well. Well, that's on us as a service provider to say, how do we figure out where this, like why they're not enrolling? Do they not know about it? Do they not trust it? Right? Like there are all of these different reasons on the ground that closing the gap in that case is not necessarily a technology solution, right? Like maybe it is we just need to make our application available in Spanish. That's one thing. But if people don't know about it, that's a marketing problem, which is terrible to say in social services, but like we want people to know about it if they're eligible. And if they don't trust it, then there's something else we need to do that is a trust building activity or different things that we would do other than just being like, here, take our technology, here, use it. Like there are plenty of reasons to not trust government services in today's day and age, and particularly over the last 4 years. So that's part of it, right? Like where we do have data, who does it represent? What is the bias in that based on who knows about a program or knows about something that's happening? And then I think we spend a lot of time when it does come down to the individual person trying to use your system opting in, like, do they actually understand what they're opting in? Do they understand the consequences? And I think in a lot of cases, we do see people that are just like, I'm not reading that legalese. I don't get it. And I want whatever's in front of me. Like, I want the value that you have. I want it. I'm here because I want it. Right. Like, yes, I do want a discount on my health or car insurance. And that's something that like thinking about how we walk people through, like we have to have the legalese, we're not getting around that, but then how do we also have the layer that like, if there are 3 bullet points that are like, this is the impact to you, or this is the risk to you, being able to communicate that so that people can make an informed trade-off instead of just saying like, I want the shiny, like, give me the discount, right?
Thank you. So I think as we're wrapping up, if anybody has any last minute questions, definitely send those over. But thank you for all the information you shared and all your knowledge. It's really interesting to hear the work that you've done and what you've been, you know, a part of. I think it's super, super interesting. And yeah, just thank you for being here and participating and your continued support in the University Y. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. So I think with that, we're going to start wrapping up. I know you shared closing thoughts in your presentation, but if there's anything else you'd like to say or share with anybody, definitely feel free to do that.
I think, yeah, just like you can use technology for good, and it takes thought and time and effort, and like people have to be like, the people building it have to be both incentivized to do that time and energy and educated in how to do it, because not everyone makes those decisions inherently or like thinks about it when they're just like, I want to make shiny. And you're like, okay, how is this going to hurt people? If we aren't thinking how it's going to hurt people, someone will take advantage of your system. So like you have to protect against it and try to protect people from the beginning.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today and listening in today. If you're interested in continuing to come, next week, our Friday Forum is going to be with Lamont Holden from the Letter L Beats, and he's going to be talking about the intersection of Black culture and technology. So definitely continue joining us for the future Friday Forums of this series. And thank you again, Lauren, for being here with us today.
Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Well, have a great rest of your Friday, everyone.
Bye, y'all.